The Destroyer: How One Coach Nearly Killed Football's Greatest Genius. Season 1987-88. AS Cannes Training Ground. A 15-year-old Zinedine Zidane sat alone on the bench, tears streaming down his face, staring at a phone booth across the street. Inside his kit bag was a train ticket back to Marseille and a letter he'd written to his parents. "I'm coming home. Football isn't for me." Just 18 months earlier, this same boy had been hailed as the most promising talent to emerge from France's youth system. Now, broken and defeated, he was ready to abandon the dream that had brought him so far from La Castellane. Between those two moments stood one man, a coach whose name would become synonymous with the darkest period of Zidane's career. This is the untold story of how football's greatest artist nearly became its greatest tragedy. The story of Michel Estevan, the coach who almost destroyed Zinedine Zidane before the world ever knew his name. When 14-year-old Zidane first walked through the gates of AS Cannes in 1986, he carried the hopes of everyone who had ever believed in him. Jean Veroux, his mentor from La Castellane, had personally driven him to the academy, whispering words of encouragement. "Show them the magic, Zizou. Show them what we taught you on concrete." The academy was everything La Castellane wasn't. Pristine grass pitches, modern facilities, professional coaching, structured training. For a kid who had learned football in housing project courtyards, it felt like paradise. Zidane's first months were a revelation. His touch was sublime, his vision extraordinary, his ability to find space supernatural. Academy coaches watched in amazement as the skinny kid from Marseille's projects outplayed boys who had been in professional systems for years. "He was like nothing we'd ever seen," recalled his first coach, Claude Puel. "Technically perfect, but with this street wisdom that you can't teach. We knew we were looking at something special, but paradise was about to become purgatory." In January 1987, AS Cannes appointed Michel Estevan as the new youth coach. On paper, his credentials were impressive. Former professional player, tactical innovator, disciplinarian who got results. What the club didn't know was that Estevan had a very specific philosophy about talented young players. They needed to be broken before they could be rebuilt. "Talent without discipline is worthless," Estevan would tell anyone who would listen. "These kids think they're already stars. My job is to remind them they're nothing until they prove otherwise." Estevan had studied Zidane's file obsessively. He knew about the boy's background, his unconventional training methods, his confidence on the ball. Most coaches would have seen these as strengths to nurture. Estevan saw them as arrogance to crush. The war between coach and prodigy began on Estevan's first day. Estevan's first team meeting was unlike anything the young players had experienced. Instead of talking about football, he talked about respect, discipline, and knowing your place. His eyes kept finding Zidane. "I don't care what you did before you came here," he announced, staring directly at the teenager from Marseille. "I don't care what coaches told you, what scouts promised you, what newspapers wrote about you. In my team, you start from zero. You earn everything." What followed was a campaign of psychological warfare that would have broken most 15-year-olds. Estevan began with small humiliations, making Zidane clean boots, carry equipment, arrive earlier, and leave later than everyone else. But that was just the beginning. In training, Estevan would stop play every time Zidane attempted one of his signature moves. The close control that had made him famous in youth tournaments was labeled showboating. His creative passing was called selfish. His ability to drift between positions was criticized as tactical indiscipline. "You think you're an artist?" Estevan would shout across the training ground. "This is football, not ballet." Estevan's most devastating blow came when he discovered Zidane's secret training methods. The boy would still spend hours after official practice working on his wall exercises, his close control drills, his unconventional techniques that had made him special. "I will not have players in my squad who think they know better than their coach," Estevan declared, banning Zidane from any individual training. "You will train when I tell you to train, how I tell you to train, and nothing more." For Zidane, this was like being told not to breathe. The concrete training wasn't just practice. It was his connection to home, his artistic expression, his identity as a footballer. Without it, he began to lose not just his edge, but his soul. Estevan's next attack was even more insidious. He began playing Zidane out of position, sometimes as a right back, sometimes as a defensive midfielder, sometimes not at all. When Zidane protested, Estevan's response was always the same. A real player can play anywhere. If you can't, maybe you're not as special as you think. The boy who had glided through midfield like a poet found himself chasing shadows on the wing, tracking back defensively, asked to do everything except what he did best. His confidence, built through years of success on Marseille's streets, began to crumble. Teammates watched in horror as the most talented player in their squad was systematically destroyed. Some tried to intervene, but Estevan's response was swift. Anyone who defended Zidane would face the same treatment. He was isolating Zinedine, remembered teammate David Sommeil, making him feel like he was the problem, like his talent was a curse rather than a gift. The crisis reached its peak during a youth tournament in Lyon, 6 months into Estevan's reign. Cannes was playing against Saint-Étienne's academy, and Zidane was starting his third consecutive match on the bench. As he watched his teammates struggle without their most creative player, as he sat in silence while Estevan berated the team at halftime, as he realized that his dreams of professional football were slipping away, something inside Zidane snapped. After the match, a humiliating 3-0 defeat, he called his parents from the team hotel. "I want to come home," he whispered into the phone, his voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore. I'm not good enough." On the other end of the line, Smail Zidane felt his heart break. He had sacrificed everything to give his son this opportunity. But hearing the pain in Zinedine's voice, he knew something was terribly wrong. What happened next saved not just Zidane's career, but football history itself. Jean Verode, Zidane's first mentor, had been quietly monitoring the situation from Marseille. When he heard about the phone call, he knew he had to act. Verode drove straight to Cannes, arriving unannounced at the academy. What he found shocked him. The confident, joyful boy he had nurtured was gone, replaced by a broken teenager who barely looked up when he entered the room. "What has he done to you?" Verode whispered, recognizing immediately that this wasn't just about football. This was about a young man's spirit being systematically destroyed. The intervention that followed was unlike anything in football history. Verode demanded a meeting with the academy director, threatening to expose what was happening if changes weren't made immediately. He brought with him video evidence of Zidane's early brilliance and testimonials from coaches who had worked with the boy. But most powerfully, he brought Zidane's story. In that meeting, Verode revealed something that the Cannes hierarchy had never understood. Zidane's unconventional methods weren't indiscipline, they were genius. His street football background wasn't a weakness to overcome, it was a strength to celebrate. His creativity wasn't showboating, it was artistry. "You have the next Platini in your academy," Verode told the stunned directors, "and you're letting one man's ego destroy him." The academy director, Pierre-Alain Frau, was horrified as he learned the details of Estevan's treatment. This wasn't coaching. This was systematic psychological abuse of a minor. The legal implications alone were staggering. But more than that, Frau realized they were in danger of destroying something irreplaceable. Football produced many good players, even many great players, but it produced very few genuine artists, and they were watching theirs die a slow death. Frau faced an impossible decision. Estevan was a senior coach with connections throughout French football. Firing him would create enemies and complications, but keeping him would mean losing not just Zidane, but potentially facing legal action for what amounted to institutional bullying. The ultimatum was delivered to Estevan that evening. Change your methods or leave. Stop the psychological warfare, start nurturing talent, or find another job. Estevan's response revealed everything about his character. If you want to coddle this spoiled brat, that's your choice. But you'll ruin him with kindness. He needs to be toughened up, not treated like a princess. He was fired the next morning. With Estevan gone, Zidane's resurrection began almost immediately. Claude Puel was brought back to work with the youth teams, and his first priority was healing the damage that had been done. "We had to rebuild him from scratch," Puel later recalled. Not his football skills, those were still there, buried under months of psychological damage. We had to rebuild his confidence, his love for the game, his belief in himself. The process was gradual but miraculous. First, Zidane was allowed to resume his individual training. The boy who had been forbidden from practicing his art could finally return to the wall exercises, the close control drills, the creative expression that defined him. Next, he was moved back to his natural position. No more right back, no more defensive midfielder. He was placed where he belonged, in the center of everything, free to create, free to express, free to be Zinedine Zidane. Within months, the broken teenager had transformed back into a footballing phenomenon. But he was different now, scarred by his experience, but also strengthened by it. He had learned that not everyone would appreciate his art, that some would try to suppress it. But he had also learned that his gift was worth fighting for. His performances in the youth team became legendary. Scouts from across Europe began making pilgrimages to Cannes to watch this boy who had somehow become even better after nearly being destroyed. On May 20th, 1989, Zidane made his professional debut for AS Cannes. As he walked onto the pitch for the first time as a professional footballer, he thought about the journey that had brought him there, not just from La Castellane but from the brink of giving up entirely. Even as Zidane's star began to rise, the shadow of his experience with Estevan lingered. Throughout his career, he would battle self-doubt that traced back to those dark months when a figure of authority had told him daily that he wasn't good enough. The confidence issues that occasionally surfaced, the moments of hesitation, the perfectionism that bordered on obsession, the need to prove himself again and again, all could be traced back to the coach who had tried to break him. That experience taught me that talent alone isn't enough, Zidane would later reflect. You need people who believe in you, who understand your gift, who will fight for your right to express it. Without Jean Varade, I would have gone back to Marseille and become another story of what might have been. What happened to Zidane at Cannes became a cautionary tale. Throughout French football, youth coaching methods were examined, psychological support systems were implemented, and the idea that young players needed to be broken before being rebuilt was finally recognized as outdated and harmful. Estevan, meanwhile, struggled to find work in football. His reputation preceded him, and no academy was willing to risk another incident like the one at Cannes. He eventually left coaching entirely, becoming a bitter footnote in the history of the sport's greatest player. Perhaps the most ironic aspect of the entire ordeal was that Estevan's attempt to destroy Zidane's creativity actually made him more creative. The experience taught Zidane to protect his artistry fiercely, to never compromise his vision for anyone. The unconventional training methods that Estevan had banned became even more important to Zidane. The individual expression that had been criticized became his signature. The indiscipline that had been punished became the foundation of his greatness. He tried to make me ordinary, Zidane said years later, but extraordinary people can't become ordinary. They can only be hidden for a while. When Zidane became a coach himself, the experience with Estevan shaped every decision he made. He became fanatically protective of young players' confidence, obsessively focused on nurturing individual talents, and absolutely intolerant of coaches who tried to suppress creativity in the name of discipline. At Real Madrid's academy, Zidane implemented revolutionary policies. No player could be criticized publicly. Creativity was valued over conformity, and individual expression was encouraged, even if it didn't fit traditional tactical systems. "I know what it feels like to have your spirit broken," he told his coaching staff. "I will never let that happen to any player under my care." In 2019, 30 years after his professional debut, Zidane was asked about the darkest period of his career. His answer revealed how completely he had transformed trauma into wisdom. "Michel Estevan tried to kill my dream, but he actually made it stronger. He showed me that my gift was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth believing in, even when others don't. Every young player needs to know that their creativity is sacred, that no one has the right to destroy it." He paused, looking out at the Real Madrid training ground, where young players were expressing themselves freely, encouraged to take risks, supported in their artistic development. "The best revenge against someone who tries to break you is to become unbreakable, and to make sure no one else ever has to go through what you did." The story of Zidane and Estevan is ultimately a story about the fragility and resilience of genius. It shows how easily extraordinary talent can be destroyed by small-minded people in positions of power. But it also shows how that same talent, when properly protected and nurtured, can survive even the most determined attempts to crush it. Today, when young players face coaches who don't understand them, who try to suppress their creativity, who mistake conformity for discipline, they have Zidane's example to follow. Not just the example of his success, but the example of his survival. The boy who nearly quit football became the man who proved that artistry cannot be coached out of an artist. The teenager who was told he wasn't good enough became the adult who showed the world what true greatness looks like. And the coach who tried to destroy him became an unwitting architect of his greatness. Because sometimes the greatest champions are forged not in comfort, but in the fire of those who doubted them. In the end, Michel Estevan did break something in Zinedine Zidane. He broke his willingness to let anyone else define his worth. And that perhaps was the most valuable lesson of all.